this happens. And we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Right. You might run a liberator like Harris Cleave out the country, but you can't run liberation out the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude. And you come up with people that you thought should be acting like pigs, that's acting like people and moving on pigs. And that's what we've got to do. So we're going to see about Bobby, regardless of what these people think we should do. Because school is not important and work is not important. Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
And another thing too, I just wanted to say happy. It's such a weird thing for some fat white guy to say. Happy Black History Month, everyone. Because Black history is just so filled with happiness. And it being Black History Month, I feel like there are a couple figures we should talk about. You know, there's the obvious mainstream ones, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, a little less mainstream in the beginning, a little more mainstream before he was murdered. But for this episode, one figure I wanted to talk about was Fred Hampton, who was a activist, a leader of the Black Panthers, and was eventually, like many people who follow his path, murdered by the FBI. And with these new revelations about J. Edgar Hoover and the fact that he basically ordered Fred Hampton to be assassinated, it kind of does just cement his legacy as one of the biggest pieces of shit that's ever lived. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover, he's the same guy who signed off on leftist leaders and union workers being murdered by police and agents. He signed off on the Nation of Islam cooperating with the FBI to murder Malcolm X. They tried to convince Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself by sending him several harassing letters about his adulterous affairs that they were basically blackmailing him with.
Now.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As Black History Month begins today, we look back at the assassination of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in Chicago 51 years ago, and how new documents reveal more details about the FBI's role in the murder of the 21-year-old revolutionary. Fred Hampton was killed December 4th, 1969, when Chicago police raided his apartment and shot and killed him in his own bed. Black Panther leader Mark Clark was also killed by police in that raid. Authorities initially claimed the Panthers had opened fire on the police who were there to serve a search warrant for weapons. Evidence later emerged that told a very different story. The FBI, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and Chicago police had conspired to assassinate Fred Hampton. Now, several hundred pages of FBI memos and reports obtained by historian and writer Aaron Leonard through a Freedom of Information Act request document that the director of the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division, William Sullivan, and the head of the extremist section of the Domestic Intelligence Division, George Moore, both played key roles in planning the raid and the cover-up that followed. For more on what these documents say, we're joined by Flint Taylor and Jeff Haas, founding members of the People's Law Office in Chicago, who are the lead lawyers in the landmark Fred Hampton and Mark Clark civil rights case. Their new piece for Truth Out is headlined, "New Documents Suggest J. Edgar Hoover Was Involved in Fred Hampton's Murder." Jeff Haas, let's begin with you. You wrote a book.
What's also interesting is 51 years later, these documents still have redactions. There's a specific redaction because an FBI agent had been called in front of a grand jury, and he was told, if you get asked any questions about blank, which is the FBI, leave the grand jury and report to your higher-ups. A year after the raid, the FBI role and COINTELPRO had never been disclosed. It was only about Hanrahan and the police. So it took us 13 years to uncover that it was COINTELPRO, a program whose objective was disrupt, destroy, and neutralize the Panthers, and specifically prevent the rise of a black messiah like Fred Hampton, who could unify and electrify the masses. It was this FBI program that led to the passing of the floor plan and the 90 shots, and Fred Hampton executed in his bed at 2:30 in the morning on December 4th.
Now, Jeff, the documents also seem to indicate that there was a plan to cover up the FBI's involvement in the raid. Could you talk about that aspect of what you've uncovered?
Yes. At the grand jury, this was a special state grand jury, because the black community was so outraged and there was a lot of pressure, they called a special grand jury. Well, they allowed the FBI agent who talked about who fired the guns, but they didn't allow anybody to talk about the floor plan or the role of the informant, William O'Neill, in setting up the raid and getting a bonus for it. So that was kept quiet. Matter of fact, if there hadn't been a raid at the Media Pennsylvania FBI office, we might never have learned about COINTELPRO.
And in terms of why it's taken so long and there's still redactions on some of these documents, I mean, there's the assassination of President Kennedy, there have been documents released from that. And here we have one radical revolutionary in Chicago, and it's taken so long just to get information about what actually happened.
Well, yes, I think the cover-up continues in the fact that many of these pages contain redaction, including the information from O'Neill. So there are things the FBI has still not released, we think, showing the involvement of higher-ups. We do have a continuous rewarding of the Special Agent Roy Mitchell, referring to the success of the raid, how the raid was critical to the role of the FBI. So see, some of these documents are new. But for the next year, Roy Mitchell got congratulated for how well he had handled O'Neill and how important the information had gotten. And they continuously internally called the rate of success, while externally they were hiding it.
And yet, so many people on the right, mostly Trumpies, want to attack Black Lives Matter. They say things like, "Why are you so paranoid? Why do you hate the police? Isn't it true that you're just criminals? Why do you have to put the black on Black Lives Matter?" This is why, right here. Because to people like Hoover, the powers that be, Black lives have never mattered to them. And they won't until there's repercussions. Repercussions for not valuing people's lives, for stripping them of their wealth forcefully, of denying them their health care, of denying them basic human rights and dignity. And I'm sorry, we need to get over this fear of the other. The fear of the scary socialist who is going to take all of the wealth that most Americans don't have in the first place. There's a reason why Martin Luther King Jr. was a socialist, a democratic socialist. There's a reason why most people in the civil rights movement have been socialists of one sort or another. Literally, all it means is caring for your fellow citizen. If you can't meet those basic expectations, your country is derelict and your leaders are slave masters. Those are slave masters on your dollar.